Today you will learn how to paint a Black Templar Space Marine Intercessor primarily using a makeup sponge. So let's get started. I've almost fully assembled my miniature, only leaving off the backpack and the arms are still removable. Today I'm painting according to the original Citadel app recipe, which means Abaddon Black, Dark Reaper and Fenrisian Grey. That's how Games Workshop recommends painting our Black Templars. Since everything was primed with Chaos Black, I'm just going over it again, as the Citadel app suggests of Abaddon Black. I've thinned the paint down quite a bit so I can apply a smooth, even coat over the entire miniature and then I'll let it dry for now. Now we come to the most important and also the easiest part, the makeup sponge. I'm using a relatively small one here, though they also come in larger sizes. I soaked it completely in water beforehand, let it absorb everything, and then wrung it out thoroughly in a towel. I take a bit of paint from the pot and do a quick test on my hand. I don't want the paint to be fully opaque. I want it to be translucent, so I can still see my skin through. With that, I start dabbing a mix of Abaddon Black and Dark Reaper over the entire miniature at a roughly 45-degree angle. You won't see much difference at first with this Black and Dark Reaper mix, but trust me, this step is extremely important. It keeps the deep black in the shadows while building up a subtle bluish-gray layer over the top. Now we continue with the same principle. This time, however, I'm using Dark Reaper straight from the pot, making sure that my sponge is still damp. If it becomes too dry during the process, I simply soak it in water again and repeat the same paint test on my hand. Once again, I don't want the paint to be fully opaque. Then I start applying the pure Dark Reaper to a specific highlight areas, such as the front of the helmet, the lower edges of the chest, and anywhere the light would hit at roughly 45-degree angle. The contrast becomes quite strong at this stage, but it will soften a bit as it dries. So I go over all the areas where I think light would naturally fall. That 45-degree angle is our best friend here once again. Now we're at the second to last layer of our armor, which is Fenrisian Blue. As you can see, it's very bright, significantly lighter than Dark Reaper. Once again, we use our sponge, making sure it's still damp. And this time we apply even less pack to it. You don't need to wash the sponge in between. The blending of the two tones is actually intentional here. So we pick out a few highlight areas and very gently dab them in. This is a step where it's easy to make mistakes, so really use a minimal amount of paint and apply it carefully to edges and key highlights like the forehead, the edges of the chest armor and the kneecaps. And repeat this all the way around the miniature until you're satisfied. And now we come to the final step for our armor, dry brushing. Since I don't want to paint edge highlights, we'll be highlighting everything using Fenrisian Grey instead. I'm using a completely dry brush, so don't wet it beforehand. We really only want to catch the very outer edges, not paint over the entire surface. I take a small amount of paint and work most of it off until it's barely visible on my skin. With that, we now highlight all the edges using upward strokes from bottom to top. You'll see that the paint only catches on the edges. We do this across the entire model, including the backpack and the armor. The motion should mostly be from bottom to top. You'll notice the effect looks almost dusty, and we apply it over the whole miniature. This way we emphasize the edges without using traditional edge highlighting, and with that our Space Marine is almost ready to be fully assembled again. And now we move on to the white, slightly weathered looking shoulder pads of our Black Templar. The official recipe calls for Rakarth flesh, a wash with Raglan flesh shade, Pellet witch flesh, and highlights with white skull. So we start with Rakarth flesh, one of my favorite paints oddly enough, and use a brush to base coat the shoulder pads. Thin the paint slightly with water, and you'll probably need 2 to 3 coats here. Be careful not to paint over the edges, focus only on the shoulder pad itself. As you can see, that was the first layer and we'll need at least one more before we're done with this step. Now we apply a wash using Raglan flesh shade. You can thin it down a bit or apply it straight from the pot. It's not a big issue if it pools slightly on the flat areas. We mainly want it to settle into the edges near the black armor to create a darker tone there. This will give us a really nice shadow toward the rim later on. Let everything dry completely before moving on to the next step. And in the next step we'll be using the sponge again. The Citadel app can be a bit unclear here. Personally, after applying a wash over a base coat, I always go back and reapply the base color to the flat areas. And that's exactly what we're doing now with the sponge. I'm using Rakarth flesh again, carefully applied with the tip of the sponge across the entire surface. I make sure not to touch the edges, since we want to keep a smooth transition from the flat area toward the rim. That way, along the edges, we retain that mix of Rakarth flesh and Raglan flesh shade, giving us a nice natural gradient. Once we've covered roughly 90% of the surface again with Rakarth flesh, using the sponge we can move on to the next color, Pellet witch flesh. This will be our first highlight color. I take it straight from the pot with a sponge. I haven't washed the sponge in the meantime, and gently dab about 40% of the top surface of the shoulder pad. The sponge allows for very precise work since its tip is relatively pointed. Unlike airbrushing, we don't need to mask anything here, though we could if we wanted. The sponge lets us work carefully and slowly without having to rely on wet blending or other more advanced techniques. And finally, I apply white skull to roughly 10% of the tip of the shoulder pad using the same technique. This gives us the final white highlight and puts the finishing touch on the whole piece. And here's what our miniature looks like at this stage, our current progress. But we still have the chest emblem and the silver areas to paint. For the silver, the Citadel recipe calls for lead belcher, nylon oil and stormhost silver. We start by painting all the silver areas with lead belcher. For the Black Templars, this includes the entire weapon, a small trinket on the shoulder and the exhaust parts on the backpack. Once that's dry, we wash all the silver areas with nylon oil. You can apply it quite generously so that all the recessed areas are nicely darkened. Not shown in the Citadel app, but for the soft areas between the armor plates, we paint them grey using Mechanicus Standard Grey and Dawnstone, one darker and one lighter grey. I start with Mechanicus Standard Grey and base coat all the soft areas first. After that, I wash everything with nuln oil, and later we'll highlight them with Dawnstone. Now we bring back all our silver painted areas using the sponge with lead belcher. That means we carefully dab the upper edges of the weapons and all the corners we can reach, without smudging silver onto the armor. This technique works especially well here. It creates a super smooth transition from the metal to the nuln oil wash. Sorry if I'm a bit out of focus here, but I think you can see what I mean. Once we've finished with lead belcher, we go over the edges again with a sponge. This gives the metal parts very soft and realistic highlights using Stormhost silver. We use it straight from the pot on the tip of the sponge, wipe off most of it and carefully dab all the upper edges to create our final highlights. And now is the perfect time to highlight those soft parts in between the armor with Dawnstone Grey. For the final part, the chest emblem, the Citadel app calls for Zandri Dust, a wash with Rayclan Flashshade, and highlights with Ushabti Bone and Screaming Skull. We base coat with Zandri Dust the complete breastplate. And here we also need 2 coats again. Next we move on to the Rayclan Flashshade tone. And cover the entire surface and make sure that the inner parts and the ridges are the darkest. After the wash is dry, we again apply a 90% layer of Zandri Dust all over the emblem. And now we move on to our highlights, Ushabti Bone and Screaming Skull. We cover roughly 70% with Ushabti Bone and a few pointed highlights of 10% with Screaming Skull. And with that, the emblem on the chest plate is finished. Now we can reattach the arms and actually only one thing is left. Even here the Citadel app doesn't describe anything, but I will first base coat the 2 LEDs on the front of the arm and the eyes with white scar paint, and then simply wash everything with the contrast color of Blood Angel's Red. And if you enjoyed the video, then follow my channel and leave a comment telling me which chapter you would like to see painted next using the sponge technique. Many thanks again to Taschengeld Deep who sponsored the materials for this video. See you next time.